on the phone. It is a pleasure to welcome back to this program Roosevelt Fellow, contributor to The Nation magazine, also to other publications, of course, Mike Konczal. Mike, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me back on, man.
So let's start with your piece on free trade. I mean, I love this piece for a number of reasons. One, of course, because this is going to be, in my mind, really the biggest story on the left of the next 6 months. When it comes to a policy standpoint, we know that there's going to be budget negotiations. We know that the Republicans may, if they sort out what's going on intracenely, I guess, if that's a word, there may or may not be some attempts to close down the government. But this is the one where there's a real fight. There's a split in the Democratic Party over fast-track authority and its implications for the TPP and its sister or cousin agreement with the EU. And you write that free trade isn't about trade, it's about bureaucrats and guns. How so?
Sure. So it's important to remember when people are going to be talking about free trade this year, and you're right, it's going to be one of the most dominant issues. Unions are already withholding funding depending on, how this is resolved. And I think, there's been a lot of talk about President Obama and now Hillary Clinton kind of rhetorically moving to the left on inequality and wages and, universal pre-K and all kinds of other things. But this is where the rubber is going to hit the road. President Obama is going to ask for authority to essentially negotiate this, and Congress will have to pass what he comes up with, something called fast-track authorization, which liberals like Elizabeth Warren are very worried about, and they're very worried about specific parts of this bill. Hillary Clinton still hasn't weighed in on the bill, though she was in favor of it while Secretary of State. And I think, for a lot of people, they hear free trade and maybe they like that idea or maybe they don't. But the idea that this is about countries trading with each other is such a minimal and small part of this bill. Those decisions about how we're going to trade with countries were basically done in the 1950s and 60s. What we're talking about now is the way international corporations trade and how we can regulate them and what powers they have in different countries.
And we should say, I mean, every time I hear something about people like the idea of free trade, I think it was Thomas Friedman said, all he needs to hear is free trade, and that's it. He doesn't need to read the details, I guess. And you make the great point, though, that, and I think it's in one of these pieces that you wrote. It's actually in the other piece about why liberals are resigned to low wages, which we'll get to soon. But you quote David Graeber as saying, whenever someone starts talking about the free market, it's a good idea to look around for the man with the gun. And the idea being that someone has to enforce any trade. Now, I've spent a lot of time over the years arguing with libertarians. The last one was a business school professor from Loyola who told me, well, the way you work this out is everybody's going to have their own court, and then there'll be another court that will mediate the decisions of those courts, and so on and so on. But at the end of that, there's a guy holding a gun, right? Or a bureaucrat.
Right. Like when you hear anarcho-capitalists or whatever talking about, what they're really describing is like gang warfare or like mobs competing to like who's going to protect local businesses. Those situations usually sound pretty terrible if you actually had to think through who's going to enforce what. And they're just they're rhetorical distractions from the actual reality we face, which is, if Philip Morris wants to sell cigarettes in Australia, and this is a real case, and I talk about it in the piece, Australia passed a law saying that they basically passed an anti-smoking campaign, and they had to package their cigarettes in a way that had a lot of ads saying how unhealthy it is to smoke. And this is like public health concerns. It's this is a general welfare. This is the stuff states normally do. Modern states kind of were designed to do. And no one thinks like I assume unless you're really in the pocket of someone, no one thinks that smoking is like really healthy. So this is a totally legitimate thing for Australia to do. And under one of these free trade agreements, something called an investor dispute clause, which is really one of the things that a lot of people focused on in TPP. Senator Elizabeth Warren has written op-eds about it. Other people have flagged it as worry, and defenders have said this is no big deal. But Philip Morris sued Australia and said that they couldn't do it. Essentially, what they called it was expropriation, that they essentially were being stolen from because they were promised these returns, and now they're not going to get them. This is a law designed to reduce smoking, which hurts their corporate profits. And what happens? You have the normal bureaucracy, the normal lawmaking and enforcement mechanism in Australia. You have the government, the Department of Health equivalent, and now there's another layer, this TPP layer, essentially run through the UN in this case, that will now really decide what happens with this law. And if Philip Morris wins, they can't enforce the law. They have to pay Philip Morris a bunch of money, and there's no recourse. They can't go lower to like the courts or the Department of Health and renegotiate it. So it means that the people who are going to enforce the law are not the people that we normally think of, and not the people who we have accountable to democratic processes.
And you describe this as basically there's just another layer of bureaucracy on top of the government bureaucracy, which is this private bureaucracy. And, this is one of the things about the TPP that sort of is fascinating from a political standpoint. For years, we hear people on the right, the far right, the libertarian right, talk about this concern about a one world government. And on some levels, this is what the TPP represents. It's just that it's not a democratic government. It's just a corporate government.
Yeah, and it's a corporate government that is going to be hostile to things that sometimes people on the right are hostile to, like environmental regulations, wage policy, investments, public health regulations. You see it in Canada. Canada has come under a lot of these through NAFTA. NAFTA has a process for investors from other countries to sue, essentially based on things like, Canada had a buy local solar program, and so it was designed to kind of build up the local economy. Naomi Klein writes about it quite a bit, and this changes everything. And to build up solar energy, and they were sued saying, this buy local thing violates NAFTA. You can't do it. If we can't do these kinds of things, that's a big problem for combating global warming. And, and it's also really about the terms of this is going to be about international corporations dealing among themselves. There's an example of one corporation in Canada that essentially just incorporated the United States to sue Canada under these things. So there's a lot of corporate malfeasance going on here. It's not that, these trades are really being opened up. It's that, the terms under who gets to set these rules about, how laws are enforced are now going to be elevated to a whole new bureaucratic level, but one that's not accountable in the ways that we normally think of in democratic structures, which themselves are often not that accountable.
Right. And so when we talk about these investor, I'm not sure exactly what they're called again. These arbitrators made up of corporate. My understanding is that they're going to basically be industry. They're going to pick 3 industry lawyers who's going to determine whether or not, in the examples that you give, Australia has imposed or has in some ways, I guess, stolen profits from tobacco firms because they're actively seeking to cut down on the amount that the citizens are smoking. Give us a couple of the other examples that you just mentioned, but also I'm curious. One example I've heard is, for instance, let's say the TPP exists. And the U.S. government decides we're finally going to mandate that the U.S. government will under Medicaid D use its ability to buy pharmaceuticals in bulk and thereby driving down the price. Is that one of those things where theoretically the pharmaceutical industry could say, okay, we're going to set up a subsidiary in a Pacific Rim country and sue the United States because they're now inhibiting our profits?
Absolutely. Canada is actually already being sued under NAFTA for essentially trying to enforce its drug patent laws. And one thing, there's going to be a couple mechanisms through which this happens. The TPP and the investor settlement's one of them, but it's part of the whole kind of privatization of law that you're going to see U.S. use its huge footprint and its huge markets to force a lot of our really terrible patent laws into other developing countries. So laws that people in the United States, which is a rich country, right? We can, even people here think these laws are abusive and they're just huge corporate giveaways, they're going to be forced on a lot of developing nations, a lot of nations that aren't necessarily rich in the developing world and in the Pacific Rim. Things like drug patent laws, the plus 75 life plus 75 laws that were basically designed to protect Walt Disney's estate.
Right.
A lot of the kind of really gross things that we see in our corporate and patent law. And the idea here is to move the enforcement towards whatever regime is most favorable to corporations. And whenever there's a dispute or whenever there's an opportunity to really kind of have to haggle out whether or not something's fair, it takes place in a realm that's just not accountable to the public. It's not transparent and it's not democratic.
So, give me your sense. I want to move on to your other piece, but give me your sense. Like, what is the argument? What is the motivation behind this? Is it just purely? Is this just purely a function of there's a lot of money out there? It seems to me that most of the stuff in this, most of the stuff in the TPP, it seems to me, has to do with so-called intellectual property and patents and pharmaceuticals. If you were to strip a lot of the implications of all those things out, it seems to me that there wouldn't be that much left to this. What's driving this? Is it just sheer lobbying and corporate money? Is there any other rational argument behind it?
There's people are trying to figure this out, right? President Obama is a president who likes taking half a loaf of bread, and so he thinks if he has a deal that could be described as good in any way, he'll try to take it. There's a military angle. They obviously want to have military primacy in the Pacific Rim and bind a bunch of nations with them to keep China in what they see as balance. So there's a host of probably not all that great military justifications as well. There's also the idea that I think America is the best country in the world and we're going to export our brilliant economic system outward. And it's one of those things where say what you will about America as a whole, but in the past 40 years we've just really turned our economy over to really predatory, bubble-blowing Wall Street firms towards a real defense of 1% wealth, be it intellectual property or bankruptcy law, and wage suppression everywhere we see, which is related to the other piece. And I think that's the fact that the worst parts of that system are the ones that are going to be pushed out forward, the ones that are about intellectual property, about Wall Street, about private rights of actions of corporations, is really telling that that's what we're going to send outward, and that's what's going to reflect the United States. And I think that's a really terrible thing.
Yeah, I agree, and it doesn't even feel like it feels like as much of the impetus is coming from the White House as anything else, right? We're in this new era where Obama's not afraid to come out for net neutrality or rationalize our relationship with Cuba or come to a deal with China on emissions, et cetera, et cetera. This one he seems to be holding on to, and it doesn't have that same sort of dynamic. It seems to me of like, here's this onslaught coming at him from let me put it this way: you don't walk around and get the sense that the average American citizen is just like, when are we going to get this TPP thing done? You know what I mean? It doesn't seem like there's a natural consistency that isn't wearing an 800 to, I don't know what an expensive suit costs, because I haven't bought a suit in literally a half a day, I think a decade. But
the kind of suit where you don't get one free when you buy it. Probably.
Exactly, right. Like the kind of suit you can't find at Men's Warehouse on that. Those seem to be the only people who are interested in this. And like they're dragging along a bunch of Democrats too.
Yeah, and the way they want to do it too, which is a kind of trust us, we'll handle it, and then just sign off on what we're going to do, is exactly what Democrats did not do during the budget negotiations when they wanted to strip out parts of Social Security and cut it, and in 2011 these kind of austerity debates. To the extent it was trusted in a lot of the healthcare debates. That's why we don't have a public option. That's why drug companies got these really sweetheart deals. So in terms, it's great that the White House has come out more aggressive on a lot of things, especially things that they can do through the executive branch. This is one place where it's exactly the kind of trust us that we should not be doing.
Right. All right. Well, let's turn to your other piece because it's not wholly unrelated, it seems to me. Why are liberals resigned to low wages? What do you mean by that? I mean, in terms of there's a certain passivity, I guess, on behalf of some on, I don't know, I would call it the left, but in liberal circles that tells a story as to why our wages have stagnated so greatly over the past 30 years.
Right. So I think, when a lot of people talk, and it's provocative to liberals, but I think a lot of the kind of chattering class are the kind of people who really dominate the public sphere on concepts of the economy. They talk a lot about, why are wages stagnating? Why is the American worker doing so poorly? And they, they'll quickly talk about, oh, well, it's sociology. It's about families and it's who's marrying who, or it's about education, or it's about technology and globalizations. But it's essentially about these kind of ethereal forces that no one really controls, or to the extent we control them, we basically blame them on individuals, that they're not trying hard enough or they're not jumping through the right hoops. When really, when we look at it, and this is a real change, I think, in the way economists talk about the economy is, what they've always talked about in the past, but I think recently it's come back, is that it's really about power in the marketplace. It's about full employment. It's about the way corporations are structured, and it's about workers' just general bargaining power and the way the government really sets the laws. And I think without understanding that, we're not going to understand why unemployment is going to continue to go down, but wages won't necessarily budge, or they certainly won't increase very much. People are kind of hoping that this will happen, but it's not going to happen without an actual political problem.
All right, so let's talk. I mean, because one of the things that I hear is, and you touch on this, is that it's basically robots and globalization that are taking our jobs, and it obviously that means we have less jobs for people here, and that means that when you have less jobs, obviously, people are more desperate to work and therefore can't command the proper amount of wages. Why is the robot story not accurate in your view?
And one thing, one reason is we just don't see it in the data, right? There's just not this growth in productivity. We don't actually see workers being substituted out. If anything, the problem's kind of the opposite, that workers are so cheap right now that there's no need to really innovate solutions and requirements for them. I mean, this is kind of one way economic historians thought about the South, especially before the New Deal and the Second Reconstruction, is that, you had slavery or you had indentured servitude or debt peonage. And so, you could kind of be a backwards country because you just had labor so immiserated you didn't have to innovate anything. That's a very exaggerated form of it, but it's a real form of it. And, the story that the idea that you would look at the productivity numbers and say, oh my God, there's so much investment that's replacing workers, or wow, the productivity per workers that are remaining, which is kind of how you'd see this, is skyrocketing. It's just not happening.
So in other words, let me just understand from a layperson's perspective. We've heard that how productivity has grown over the past 30 years, but it's grown at a pace and in a sort of trajectory that doesn't indicate big technological breakthroughs that are replacing large swaths of workers.
Yes, that's exactly right. There's nothing that shows that workers have suddenly become a lot more important to the economy than they've always been. I mean, those changes have been happening for 100 years. We can argue whether or not, to what extent it has caused problems for workers over the past 30 years, and there's definitely a case to be made for that. But the idea that, right now going forward, we will never see wages increase isn't true. And also for highly educated workers or engineers or computer scientists or the people who we think would benefit from this kind of economy, their wages haven't gone up either. So it seems like a much bigger problem. And one thing I argue it's kind of nihilism, because the way the robot story is told isn't really as much an analytical story often when you hear it. It's almost a kind of palliative, well, at least we don't have to deal with this as a political problem. We don't have to go out. I've heard it from labor people or from other Democrats that were just like, well, yeah, the robots are taking all the jobs and that sucks, but what can we do about it? As opposed to, no, wait, we actually have to organize. And even if the robots are taking all the jobs, well, that means that, the government, workers should own robots or whatever. Or like the idea it's a means to not actually have to think of this as a political problem that's done through the state that we need to organize on and demand higher wages and more prosperity.
Why do you think there's that tendency? I guess I could come up with a couple of stories as to why the labor leadership would say that is that they just don't want to have to argue on that terrain, and rather just sort of stay in their silo and get their remaining workers as much of a deal as they could get. And I guess I can understand. I certainly understand, why. I guess centrist prognosticators and analysts would make that argument, because that also is just sort of like, it's nature. You can't stop the rain. You can't stop the fact that technology is going to displace us, and that it makes it easier for us to hire somebody in Bangladesh. And so, of course, our wages would go down.
Absolutely. The nature is the right metaphor, right? Because the way a lot of this free market economics has infiltrated a lot of the ways people think now is that it treats the economy as this kind of natural thing. And crucially that, the only thing that really matters, like the only thing that matters for the rain is the clouds and a few other things. The only thing that matters for wages is your human capital and some technology. And that's it. There's nothing you can really change. When really we know that, things like minimum wage, things like labor unions, things like full employment, things like CEO pay, all really affect who benefits from the prosperity that, how productivity goes up, what happens to wages. It's so funny when I hear a lot of people say, oh, what we need is more productivity. We need, better educated people. We need harder working people. We know from the last 30 years that won't budge wages, because wages and productivity have completely separated. We're more productive. We're richer. The economy has doubled in its actual wealth per person over the past 30, 35 years. But wages are basically flat, or maybe they're up like 5 or 10% when the economy's up 100%.
So in other words, and just to be really clear here, what we have is a distribution problem. Wages have been going up just only for a very narrow subset of people who work in the economy in some fashion.
Yes, essentially the people who sit on top of the economy, CEOs, executives, the financial sector, people who hold certain kinds of property, land, especially in very desirable cities. Those are places where we don't really think of like, oh, wow, that CEO worked 400 times harder. That's why his income's up 400 times more. Or, those people who packaged all those mortgages that they knew were going to explode have been so productive. They need to have these huge paychecks. There we have to actually look at the structure of the economy, what kind of regulations are in place, what kind of taxes are in place. And we know that distributes the income just as much as anything else related to, how hard people work or the technology that they have.
I know we skipped the Federal Reserve, but I want to just stay on this. Because the story that we're told as young children is the harder you work, the more money you make, the more value you have to society, the more money you make. You wouldn't pay these baseball players millions of dollars a year unless people wanted to show up and watch them. That's their value. But the structure of our economy has been rigged or structured in such a way now that those sort of like aphorisms, I guess, or principles are just simply not followed. You talk about this in terms of how our productive enterprises are organized, and that's that idea that CEOs and board of directors and shareholders and then of course we talk sort of about the broader financialization of our economy, are reaping all the rewards of the increased productivity of workers. So in other words, the same amount of remuneration is going out. In fact, it's grown because our economy has grown. It's just that it's just getting siphoned off. And on this program, we've had Bill Lazonic on from UMass, who's talked about a lot of those reasons why he thinks including stock buybacks and all of those things have been incentivized by our tax code over the years. But let's talk about the Federal Reserve. How is that one of the culprits?
Unemployment has been very high for the past 7 years. And then in general, unemployment has been much higher over the past 30 or 40 years than it was during the mid-century period. When labor markets are slack, there's just not as much demand for workers, and workers have less bargaining power to demand higher wages. They're less credible if they're going to leave to take another job, which might give them a raise. And when unemployment's above 6% for 6 years, or however you want to break it down, since the Great Recession started, there's a lot of slack that's built in the economy, and it's allowed executives and shareholders to claim much more of the surplus that's generated in the workplace. It's brought the returns of capital very high. So it's not even that workers get a smaller slice. It's it's that there's a smaller pie for workers, period, because capital holders or shareholders, as Bill Zonick argues persuasively, have much more power than they did 35 years ago, and now in the Great Recession have even more. And I think it's important to understand that it's really watching the Federal Reserve so eventually the Federal Reserve is going to raise interest rates. They think maybe this year, hopefully not. But the moment they do, it's kind of starting to signal, well, this is as low as unemployment will go. And I think people are hoping that something magic will happen when unemployment gets below a certain point. And hopefully wages will start to increase. But it's important to understand workers still work in these corporate structures that are regulated by laws that shove a lot of wealth upward. And, you can't just, let unemployment go to 10% and let it hover above at very high rates for half a decade and then hope like 1 month of 5% employment is going to fix everything, right? You need to have unemployment very low to try to balance this out. But the moment it starts to get low, everyone's going to say, well, we're done there. And I think this, whether or not there will be like a catch-up period to make up for the Great Recession will be one of the big political struggles in the next decade.
Am I naive to think that really what you should focus on from the Federal Reserve's perspective in terms of when to raise rates should be some type of wage inflation? I mean, some semblance of wage inflation as opposed to simply you get to some magic number that you've made up essentially about unemployment?
Exactly. You want to look at wage inflation and overall inflation because, what might be wage inflation might just be that workers' wages are catching up to what they should have been as a result if the Great Recession didn't happen or wasn't as severe as it was. But yeah, what the Fed's going to do is going to say, well, if unemployment gets very low, we believe these kind of convoluted stories about how that will then cause inflation to skyrocket. And we want to be ahead of the curve. And from everyone's point of view is that these theories are not well developed. It's not clear what they are. Unemployment was 4% under Bill Clinton. It was one of the few times we've actually had broad-based wage gains in a while. And there was no inflation threat. Like the economy didn't fall apart or overheat so much it exploded, which is what their worry is. So I think, it's not just a matter of like, oh, well, they got unemployment to this low number, we're done. It's about, well, how low can it go and how long can we keep it there and what are the trade-offs? Because there's a lot of workers have these scars from the Great Recession, and how much are we going to let them actually try to heal versus, oh, okay, we've finally done enough. Let's now call this the new normal and proceed from here.
And then your third element you mentioned is government policy, which on some level we've covered, but it deals with issues like wage decline. It deals with issues about unionization and things like you mentioned bankruptcy laws, and I would imagine also sort of lack of free higher education. I mean, all no child care, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and one thing I'd really want to emphasize is taxes. I mean, there was for people who paid attention to the so-called fiscal cliff and what was going to happen with the Bush tax cuts, there's a lot of fight about income taxes and, who's rich. Should they go up for 400,000 or people make 400,000, people make $1 million? Where should they kind of like kick in? But there's very little talk about the estate tax or the capital tax on dividends or capital income. People was essentially shareholders, which are all predominantly 1%, and even the tip top of 1% phenomena. Like that's the people who make that income. And they went up a little bit, but they didn't go up to the Clinton years. And those are really
or the Reagan years, for that matter.
Certainly not the Reagan years, where they were roughly equal to where we think they should be. And those matter a lot for decisions because if as Lazonic shows, and we have a paper at Roosevelt from Josh Mason that show like there's other evidences. There's very good evidence on this that when dividend taxes go down, money leaves the firm quicker. But there's no real evidence that it like boosts wages or boosts investment, which is what everyone said it would. And that's a real important way for who like benefits from what happens in corporations.
That to me seems like one of the fundamental things is basically just this idea of, what we consider capital gains. Right? I mean, on some level, it's fairly arbitrary. I'm not even clear. I mean, other than the fact that it's not something that you labor for, it's pretty wide open, right? I mean, it's not like you're actually investing in a company that is going to allow the company to grow and create jobs. It's you just, any more than I'm investing on the Patriots to win the Super Bowl.
Right. In some sense, it's really what's left over after you've paid the workers and you've kept the machines running. That's the capital gains, and so it is this kind of residual profit that's left over. And if it's taxed less, there's more incentive to create more of it, which means you should lower wages or invest less or innovate less.
Right, and there's nothing to say that, like, you're going to create more of this, you're going to pace yourself and create more of it 10 years out or 15 years out or 20 years out, which is the way that these companies used to function, right? It's like, hey, I can get a lot of it if I just cut my labor force for 3 or 5 years and I'm on to my next thing.
Absolutely, and the flip side is more important. Is if the CEO can't tell the investors who always want money out of the firm to say, hey, you need to hold on for a year or two because we're going to try to innovate this cool thing and it may not work, but if it does, it'll be great for society. If shareholders have essentially a veto and CEOs can't say that, which is what you want businesses to be able to say, that's a major problem. Or if shareholders essentially make the terms of those kinds of gambles for companies with the innovation we want so punitive that it's very difficult to do, that just means we're going to have less brilliant things or things that make life better.
Indeed. Mike Konczal, thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. We'll put a link to both pieces at majority.fm.
Thanks so much for having me.